Hey, everybody, welcome to the official Do Good Better podcast. I'm your host, Patrick Kirby, and of course, we bring on guests to talk about things that our small and medium-sized nonprofits can use to do good better. And one of the things that I think drives our nonprofits crazy is trying to figure out how to move from annual giving to major gift giving, and then talking about the very scary and very misunderstood legacy giving area to your revenue and donor relationship stuff. Terrifies people. They don't know what they don't know. They don't know how to explain it. They don't know what they need to know. Worry not, my friends. I've brought on an expert. Nay, I've brought on an international expert. Ligia Pena, she is a globetrotting fundraising consultant. She's a international legacy fundraising consultant. One of the more humorous human beings that I've ever met. And we're going to have a blast talking about something that drives, I think, nonprofits crazy that you don't normally think is fun. We're going to make it fun for you today. Ligia, welcome to the official Do Good Better podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to be here and to spend the next 30 minutes with you.
It's going to be great. I'm super stoked about this. So for those who are clicking through iTunes and Spotify and find us on YouTube, they're wondering, oh my goodness, I've been trying to figure out how on earth to do legacy giving and even figure out what our first step should be, but they probably don't know who you are. You're globetrotting all over the place. So so could you, as a 5,000 foot view, who you are, what you do, and why we're talking today?
So I used to globetrot an awful lot pre-pandemic. Obviously, it's been pretty grounded like everybody else. And I can't wait to pack my bags and hit the air again. So my name is Ligia Pena. I am an international legacy consultant out of Montreal, Canada. I've been in the nonprofit sector for over 20 years now as a fundraiser. I've done everything under the sun, from donor acquisition, annual giving, monthly, mid-level, major foundation grant writing, and legacies. And then legacies just became my passion. It just, I mean, I get excited about it. I really, really do. I geek out on this like nobody's business. And so I've been doing legacy fundraising for over 10 years as well, but I really specialized in this area about 7 years. And what I mean specialize is dedicate every breathing moment of my life to it. That was facilitated mostly for 4.5 years while I was working at Greenpeace International. And that's where the international element came in play. I worked with a few NGOs prior to that, but at Greenpeace, I was the global legacy manager. So I was supporting our offices around the world with their Gifts and Wills program. So I got to dabble into all the different markets and see how legacy giving is done differently from North America. And boy, oh boy, are there big differences. So that was really interesting.
I love talking with super nerds who like talking about super nerdy things that revolve fundraising. So we're about to hammer out like the nerdiest portion of
bring it on, because I'm also doing my PhD on this.
See, we got you right before the PhD. You can use this as part of your dissertation, by the way. I give you permission to whatever we come up with brilliance today. I think, all right, so let's dive right in. I don't think we need to sort of spend any time giving any sort of highlight reels. We're going to figure out how to take that first step. So I imagine everybody listening who runs a small, medium-sized nonprofit, even if you're a large nonprofit, but haven't dove into the idea of legacy giving, it's a terrifying proposition. So maybe we start off with, why is it so scary for nonprofit leaders or fundraisers to approach or talk about the subject of legacy giving?
Oh, that's a $1 million question, and it's a big one. And this comes from experience, because I was a small shop fundraiser. That's how I started my career. So I know exactly what that's like. I mean, heck, I even wrote a chapter in a book about small shop fundraising. So it's really scary. First of all, let's demystify. It actually isn't scary. You just need to understand some of the foundational stuff, right? But I think the reason why a lot of organizations struggle with pulling the trigger on starting a legacy program is because the pressure that senior management, boards, programs put on fundraisers to raise money for the immediate needs, it's really hard to split their time between making budget for the year versus having conversations with donor who will leave a gift that will get realized years from now, and perhaps you won't even be around to see the benefit of your work today. So when you're pulled in those kind of opposite directions, it's really difficult to reconcile that and to say, oh yeah, sure, I will take 10 hours out of my 40-hour week to dedicate myself to legacies. It's really hard to do that. And that's, I think, one of the major obstacles to overcome in any size organization that doesn't currently have a legacy program. Another big obstacle is two other big obstacles. The second one is everyone thinks that they need to be a lawyer, a financial planner, an accountant, or something like that.
Yeah.
Because they don't have that expertise, and they're like, well, how can I talk to my donors about the legality and all of that? But the key is that everybody has their expertise. You're not expected to talk about an area of expertise that is not yours. And as a fundraiser, your area of expertise is your mission and your donors. That's it. That's all you're expected to do. Because if a donor has a specific question that has to do with accounting or fiscal laws, or even the legal side of it, you should be telling them to seek their own legal advisor. You do not tread in those waters.
And it's usually true, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I've usually bumped into this, that anybody asking you a question about legacy giving probably has somebody in their back pocket, or they've got an investor, they've got a lawyer, they've got some sort of person that they work with on a regular basis that has the answers that they probably haven't brought and broached the subject with, but they've got experts and they've got people, typically that have, that you can refer to or they can ask.
Well, exactly. And I mean, even if they don't, and you're right, most of the time they do have advisors already. And if they don't, then that's why you as a professional, you should connect with people who have those areas of expertise that you could refer to them if a donor asks a question. Or you can say, look, here's a list of lawyers that have been used by other donors and that they really like their service. We do not say, you do not want to say, oh, I recommend this person, because there's always a bit of an ethical and sort of, thing you don't want to, there's a line you don't want to cross, but you can say, here's a list. You interview them and select the one that suits you best. Yeah. So that's one of them. And then the last obstacle is that in society, we still have a lot of people who are not comfortable with the concept of death and dying.
Yeah.
And in my experience, those who block legacy giving the most are the ones who have not made peace with their own mortality, or they feel uncomfortable with it. And so until you can address that personally, yourself, but also with your management, you will always find that those obstacles along the way. You will have that tension in everything. So it's really important to have that conversation as well, as like, what have you made peace with your own mortality? Can you get over the fact that, the gift is activated? Die. Well, you're all gonna die, but here's the thing, is like, this is what makes me go bananas, is if you'll think, well, it's so depressing, you're going to be talking about death. I have never in 20 years of fundraising talked about death with a donor, but I've always talked about life and the values that was important to them and what their vision for the future is. Talking about legacies, the only place where death comes into play is that's when the gift is activated. But otherwise, the conversation is about life and what, how you want to leave the world after you've passed.
I think if we can get past the idea of addressing legacy giving, we can muster enough strength to know that we've got connections if nobody has them, but really everybody's asking the question that probably has somebody to deal with some of these things. What's the first step? Let's just say you have zero legacy planning programs at your nonprofit. Maybe you're a newer nonprofit, which is, by the way, the best time to start planning what you're going to do for legacy giving. What's the first step that you would recommend you do as a fundraiser to start initiating at least the thought process of adding legacy giving to their portfolio of donor work?
So depending on where the organization is, I often tell fundraisers, have the conversation internally about what the space that legacies can take within the organization. And perhaps even a step prior to that, which is something we probably should have done at the beginning of the podcast, is what do we mean by legacies?
Ooh,
because we use a lot of terminology, right? And, recognizing that in the US and to a certain extent, Canada as well, when we talk about legacies, it means a lot of different things. When you talk about legacies in Europe, it's one very specific thing, and that's gifts and wills. In the US and Canada, to a certain extent, it's plan giving. Well, plan giving, you've got like a list this long about, of what that means. We're talking about all the different financial vehicles, right? So for the sake of this conversation, when I say legacies, I'm referring specifically to gifts and wills. So I would say the first step for an organization is deciding what donation vehicle they would like to integrate first and foremost, okay? Because it's not for all of the organization to start offering plan gifts and all of the financial vehicles. So can I get on a soapbox for like 30 seconds?
I would love it.
So this is my something that drives me absolutely batty. There are a lot of things that drive me bad, but one thing that is very particular to the US especially, Canada still, but I see a shift happening, is organizations, which kind of ties in with your first question about what is so scary for organizations to start a legacy program, is that historically, plan giving programs, we'll use that term for now, plan giving programs have been established by large institutions. So usually large educational institutions. Harvard was the first, if memory serves me right, Harvard is the first endowment fund established in the US. Please correct, you might need to fact check
Got
me.
it. No, you nailed it. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
It also sits, I think, at like $20 billion currently. So
if not, I think I thought it was in the trillion. I think it's in the trillion or something. Anyway,
I think, yeah, who knows? It's ridiculous.
It needs to be fact checked, but yeah. regardless of the dollar amount, it's kind of, it's inconsequential to the conversation. So what happens is that a lot of these smaller organizations that are toying with the idea of starting a legacy program, they look at, the large cultural organizations, the large Ivy League university foundations, and they look at what they offer their donors, and they're like, oh my goodness, we need to do this. We need to, because we're always told, look at, your competitors, look at the big ones and do exactly what they do. And it's just like, no, that's why we're not tapping into the potential that there is in legacies in the US and in Canada, because they are offering that because they have the kind of donors that are ready. As you were saying, they probably have a certain knowledge. They probably have an army of financial advisors, right? If you're in a small social service community organization, you don't have those kinds of donors. So why would you even want to offer annuities and remainder trusts and all of this kind of stuff? You don't have the donors that will most like I'm not saying you can't have them, but the probability of having them is pretty small. So why are you holding yourself back, thinking that you need to elevate your organization to the level that the Harvards and the MITs and the Penn State are? And so that creates an us and them within our own sector, and it's so wrong. So why do I always, I'm the kind of fundraising consultant that's all about gifts and wills, because it's the number one easiest form of plan gifts. And if you were to just offer legacies to your donors, man, you'll have plenty of work for a long time, because one thing's for sure, everyone's gonna die.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I love what you said about the us versus them. We talk a lot on the podcast about comparison is the thief of joy. And, you raise $10,000 and you should be ecstatic because that's a lot of money for your particular small organization. And someone down the road raises $1 million and you're like, well, I don't feel like I've raised enough money. Well, you just raised $10,000. That's not something to shake a
Yeah.
So that's the problem there too. And the other thing that I think you bring up is when you are comparing your legacy giving program and you're just starting, don't worry about it. But when you're comparing it, it seems so overwhelming to get to a $200 billion endowment that you forget and you refuse to take that first step because you look at it as, well, I'll never get there. So I'll just go back to what I know, which
Defeatist.
is annual small $20 donations, which means a lot, but you're thinking long-term. You're like looking for that patience and that payoff about building relationships for the long haul. I think when people are looking at their donor list, and I think this is the question that people have too, is I don't have a donor list large enough to incorporate or activate a sort of a legacy program. Is that a thing I should be worried about? Or am I just making this up because I don't want to do some of the work that's going to make this pay off later?
Yep. That. It's a deflection mechanism.
Yeah.
Right? Because the big thing is that we're conditioned as fundraisers, and management is conditioned to look at fundraising success based on how much money came in. But the rules are completely different when it comes to legacies. Okay, what do I mean by that? I mean, the success of your legacy program will come in if you bring people into your pipeline and you're engaging with them. The dollar amount doesn't matter just yet. It does, but that's not what you should be focused on today. What you should be focusing on today is acquiring donors from within your donor base into a legacy conversation where they're inquiring about how they can support your mission and support your beneficiaries, how they are progressing in their decision-making process, and then converting them into pledge. Yeah. That's the success of your program. The gift will come in after, because in any case, you can't bank that money anyway. You can't bank it now. You may not bank it tomorrow. You may bank it in 2 or 3 years' time. You could bank it maybe next year or maybe in 15 years. What you're doing is the most selfless thing you can do right now if you start a program today. And what I mean by being selfless is you're putting in effort and taking time away from your work to do this because you're setting up the fundraiser that will be doing your job in 5 years' time or 10 years' time. You're setting them up for success because you just demonstrated how important your mission is by setting it up for long-term sustainable success, by putting your legacy program today. And I say to those executive directors, or even to those fundraisers that don't want to start at least having conversations with donors about legacy gifts, if you're not doing that now, then get out of the job.
Yeah.
Go work for the private sector, because you are doing your organization and your benefit, but worse, not even your organization, you're doing your beneficiaries a disservice. And I almost want to say shame on you, but shame on you.
Yeah. So this is such a wonderful note. And I'm so glad you said this, because a lot of the nonprofits are always scrambling for end of year gifts, and they're trying to make budgets. They're not thinking long-term, right? We already kind of talked about that. Your conversation with your executive director and your board of directors is explaining exactly just that. Is that the seeds you're going to plant are going to bear fruit when you are way gone from the organization. And that's the purpose of being on a board, is setting up this organization for success. It's the same way that you should be acting and thinking as a fundraiser, is what can I do now to build a relationship so that when I leave, it's still going to be great. So I love that you brought that point up. And I love the other thing too, which is you can't determine when somebody's going to give for how much. But you can control the one thing, which is field activity, relationship building, asking the questions and getting people to understand the importance of that. That's what you can control. You can claim yourself a win by having a great conversation or a great meeting, or somebody saying, I'm going to put 10% of my wealth when I pass away. I'm only 52 and I hope I don't die for another 35 years. I hope you don't either, but I'm going to do that. That's your benchmark of success in this realm, is field activity. I'm so glad that you said that, because that needs to be emphasized over and over again.
So here's a couple more additional tidbits. When I was at Greenpeace, we had a group of all of my counterparts in all of the other INGOs, and we would exchange data, like our success and everything. And what we discovered, what we realized over the years, and for like the 4.5 years I was there, every year was consistent. When we look at our overall income and the source of who the donors were, between 55 to 65% of legacy gifts were coming in from people who were completely unknown to our organizations. I'm talking about people who were not even in our database. 55 to 65%. When I shared this at a conference at AFP Toronto, their Congress a few years ago, I shared that in one of my sessions, and a woman raised her hand, and she was from a small rural hospital foundation. And she said for them, it was 75% of legacy gifts came from unknown donor, like people completely unknown that were not in their database. People are watching, people are reading your stuff. So you're a small organization, you're saying, yeah, but where do I start? I don't have any money. Fine, don't spend, I'm the one that gives workshops on how to start a legacy program on a shoestring budget. Use what you currently have. You have a website, put information there. Talk about why legacies are important. Don't talk about the mechanics. No one gives a rat's ass. Oh, could I say that on?
Yeah, you totally can. Yes, please.
Okay. Donors don't need to know the mechanics of, like, you know, why it's a tax advantage and all of that. That's unimportant, but you need to inspire them. Put on your website, use the PS in your annual appeal or in whatever it is that you come out, put a small article in your newsletter. Don't start developing. You don't need a brochure. You don't need to start a death brochure. You don't need a death newsletter. I don't know if people still use that, but I remember when I was starting.
First of all, I need to bring back a death newsletter because that sounds amazing. And I think that needs to happen. I haven't heard that term in like 10 years and I'm bringing it back. You've inspired me. The other thing too, and to piggyback off of that too, when you are giving talks in front of groups of individuals who you're just telling your story, you know, if you're inspired by this and if you're affected in any way, this is a great way when you're talking with your, you know, legacy or your advisors or whatever, like, you know, consider a couple of percentages to go to our organization so that we can continue to do our work. Mention it in passing. You need no expertise in the whole thing.
Exactly. Like people always use a term drip marketing, which makes my skin crawl. Like,
Yes.
Gross. My friend Jen Love of Agents of Good in Ontario, she says, sprinkle legacy dust everywhere.
Brilliant. It's brilliant.
Little legacy dust everywhere. Don't create new stuff, put it everywhere, and then start integrating into the regular conversation in your organization.
I love it. When you're looking at your list, and again, it doesn't matter how big it is, it doesn't matter, okay? Are there certain things that you can look at from donor history that are going to give you at least a little indication? They're not going to be, again, there's no one, unless you have a note that says, I'm going to give you a lot of money if you ask me in your notes and your whatever. That's about as only affirmative thing you're going to find out. But are there little nuggets of information within a donor history that we should be looking for to go, boy, this would be an interesting conversation with this donor because of this?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I bet you most people will say, and this is usually like those I'm going to dig my heels in, and that's why I don't want to do it. Well, we don't have any major donors. We don't have wealthy donors in our database. That's like the number one thing that usually small, medium-sized organizations tell me.
Absolutely.
And so
absolutely they will. Yeah.
So usually that's like, well, thank you for that. Mm-hmm. Now let me demystify that for you. Let me debunk that for you. Think about how the thought process of a person, the thought process that a person goes through to consider their decision to include you in their will along with their loved ones. Okay, just try to imagine you being in those shoes. You're sitting down, you're writing your wishes before going to see your legal advisor. and you go, this organization is so important to me that I want to include them in my list, in my will, along with, you know, my niece, my nephew, my kids, grandkids, whatever the case may be. Imagine like what that thought process is like. What comes to mind to you, for you, Patrick?
First of all, I don't want to think about this. Secondly, you know, it's what do I care about the most? I'm prioritizing my passions.
Exactly. So what do you want to be looking at in your database? Who are your donors that demonstrate the most passion, the most love for your organization?
It sure isn't the amount. It's the amount of time they have spent.
Exactly. And how long they've been giving to your organization, how often they've given. That's why you should be looking at your monthly donors. Mm-hmm. First and foremost. Now, I'm not saying that your mid-level and major donors are not passionate. Nope. That's not what I'm saying. But when you look at behavior that demonstrate that they're committed, you want to be looking at your monthly donors first and foremost. So knowing full well that you're limited in time, resources, everything, and you only have a finite amount of hours to work on this, start engaging with your older donors within your monthly giving program. You don't have a monthly giving program, get to it. So that's another thing, is that what's always really interesting working with organizations, when we start having conversations about their legacy program, a lot of the discussion is more focused on, well, how do you acquire your donors? What are the channels in which you're acquiring? What's the journey you're taking them on throughout their time? Because if you did a crap job with all of that, if you have and I'm sorry, I don't mean to be crass, but let's call a spade a spade. If you're just basically churning donors in and out, and you have a very high attrition rate, and you don't have an engagement program, you don't have a stewardship program to move donors, if you haven't thought through what the journey is for the donor, I can tell you you will be able to start a legacy program. You will be able to get legacies, but it'll be so much harder, and it's going to cost you more in the long run than if you go back and go, okay, how do we onboard this donor that just came on through a digital mean? How do we onboard this donor that came in through a direct mail piece? And then what is the next step? How long do we wait until we repeat the gift? How long do we wait until we increase our gift? When do we actually convert them into a monthly donor? Like, you have to think through all of that, because then you can go back and go, we can drop a legacy message here, and we can drop a legacy message there, and then people start self-identifying, and that creates, sorry, I'm using my hands a lot, but I'm like visualizing an actual pipeline where you are moving people towards that stage eventually, regardless of where they are in their age but that's where data insights is so important. Sorry, I could go on.
Well, what I love about this too is, if you are thinking about your organization, well, how am I going to increase gifts from now until eternity? Starting with legacy giving, almost reverse engineering this whole process. What you've done, which is beautiful, is it's coming to the root of like, what is the experience of a donor from start to finish? And it's really going to force you to think about how you interact with your donors, number one, which means you're going to interact better with your donors, number two, because you're thinking about it more purposefully. Number three, what's going to come of that is you're going to be actively listening to the donors, because you're going to try to give them the better experience, which means you're going to pay attention to things that, like, I have a lot of money, or my grandmother has a lot of money, which is going to lead you to individuals who have capacity, who have individuals who really love what you do. It is a process, and it's an end result of a process of thinking more purposefully of your donor interactions. That's what legacy giving is in the first place. And if you don't have if you don't have an annual or a monthly giving program, find the longest giver of your entire database and start there. And then you start with your monthly giving. So there are so many things. And what I love that you have broken this down to is you have all you need currently to put this together.
Yeah.
You just need to pause and say, what do we need to do for the next step? And you listen to this podcast 3 or 4 times, because there are so many nuggets of wonderful information that you have given to get us out of this first step rut
Mm-hmm.
get you into a program that is going to pay off dividends so much further down the road. But at the same time, at the same time, if you're paying attention to your donors, you're going to get immediate results at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah, because when you delve into your data, if you see that you've got donors that are like, people always say, well, why would I? They're going to, they're probably going to come in like 10 or 15 years. But how do you know? Maybe you've got donors who are at that age today, right, where it might be in about 3 or 4 years. I mean, when I helped the Greenpeace Japan office, everyone's like, you're wasting your time. They're not ready. Well, within a year of implementing a passive program, not a super proactive program, but a passive program, they had 100 people in their pipeline, and two legacies had come in within 1 year. Now, is it because of me? No, I don't take credit, but they did everything I told them to do, and they engaged with donors. Why? Because they had a lot of older donors.
Weird. If you just do some of the heavy lifting and work, you're going to be great. I think a lot of people are going to have an aha moment here. And I think a lot of people are going to realize that they have the capacity and potential to put something like this together. And the payoff is going to be huge, except they probably need a little kick in the butt, which means they probably need somebody like you to do that. So how on earth do people get a hold of you so that you can do some butt kicking and get them into this legacy giving program process and mindset going forward? How do we get a hold of you?
You can get a hold of me at www.globetrottingfundraiser.com. And oftentimes, like, usually the fundraiser is like, I wish I could tell them this to management, hire me. I'll tell them. I have no problem because I've got no stakes in this, right? I'll tell them, like, you're wrong. And I have no problem with it, Yeah, so globetrottingfundraiser.com, and there's a contact page where you can reach out to me. I also try to write a blog. I have very little time between school and work, but I try. But you can get there's a lot of my old blogs that are up there, so you can find a lot of tools. And I even have a resource page with some downloadables and examples and this and that. So yeah.
One of the things that I will nearly guarantee you is that your leadership team is probably not enthusiastic about any of this because it's overwhelming. And so to have somebody like Ligia come in and be enthusiastic for you and with you is going to increase the amount of opportunities that you have to move some of this needle forward. I swear to you, having this sort of personality come at your leadership team to say you can do it and handhold is going to be effective. So get your butts into the show notes where we will put all of these links, and click on your globetrotting fundraising friend and go and find out as much information as possible. Click on some of those downloads. And while you're clicking around, by the way, if you haven't followed and shared this particular podcast, if you aren't a subscriber, do it, because you're going to get interviews like this all the dang time. And give a 5-star review, because this is a 5-star guest, and I guarantee you're going to enjoy the next ones coming down the pipe too. And then go back to the show notes and finish your contact form to get a hold of Ligia, because it will pay off for you in the end. This has been awesome. First of all, thanks for what you do. This is a topic that is not discussed enough, especially with our small and medium-sized nonprofits. I appreciate your perspective. I appreciate your enthusiasm. I appreciate you just being another one of these enthusiastic human beings in the world, in the fundraising realm. This is a joy to me. And thank you so much for being a guest on the official Do Good Better podcast.
Thank you so much.
You're the best.
No, you're the best.